It all started with something small. You see, when I first moved into this neighborhood, I wasn't looking for drama. I wasn't looking for a fight. All I wanted was a quiet piece of land where I could live peacefully, mind my own business, and enjoy the fruits of my hard work. I had spent years saving up, working long hours, sacrificing weekends and vacations so I could finally buy a home that felt like mine. And when I found this place, tucked away by the creek, with enough space for a garden, a workshop, and a trail that led right to the water, it felt like fate had finally given me a break. But the one thing that really made this property special was the bridge. Now, it wasn't some grand $1 million construction. No, it was a simple wooden bridge I designed myself, connecting my yard to a walking trail that wound down by the creek. That bridge wasn't just a shortcut, it was a piece of me. It cost me $10,000 to build, but to me, it was worth every penny. It symbolized freedom, connection, and honestly, a dream realized. When I stood on that bridge in the morning, sipping my coffee as the sun rose over the water, I felt at peace. When my nieces and nephews came to visit, they'd race across it, laughing, their little footsteps clattering against the planks. And at night, sometimes I'd sit out there with a lantern, just listening to the water flow beneath me. That bridge wasn't just wood and nails, it was a reminder of what I'd built with my own 2 hands. But apparently, the HOA didn't see it that way. From the moment I moved in, the Homeowners Association had their eyes on me. You know the type? Self-important, power-hungry neighbors who think running an HOA makes them royalty. They nitpicked at everything. The color of my mailbox, the length of my grass, the way I parked my truck too close to the curb. I played along at first, thinking, fine, if keeping the peace means trimming the lawn twice a week, I'll do it. But then they came after the bridge. At first, it was letters in my mailbox, thin envelopes with official-looking headers. Your bridge is an unapproved structure. Your bridge is unsightly and out of compliance. Immediate removal required. I read them, laughed, and set them aside. Because here's the thing. I had permits. I had clearance. I'd followed the rules when I built it. And beyond that, the bridge wasn't even visible from the main road. It sat entirely on my property, connecting to a public walking trail that nobody else even maintained. It wasn't hurting anyone, but to the HOA, it was about control. One afternoon, I went to one of their meetings to try and clear things up. I walked into the community center, papers in hand, permits ready to show. The board sat at the front like judges in a courtroom, smug smiles on their faces. I explained everything calmly, told them the bridge was legally built, even offered to repaint it if they didn't like the finish. You know what they said? One of them leaned forward, smirked, and said, "It doesn't matter if it's legal. It doesn't fit the aesthetic of our community. It makes the rest of us look bad." That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with rational people. I was dealing with bullies who enjoyed throwing their weight around. The warnings turned into threats. Fines, letters from their lawyer, every week something new, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let a group of nosy neighbors tell me I couldn't enjoy my own property. Then, one morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery. It was just past 6 a.m. The sun barely creeping over the trees. I heard the roar of an engine, the crunch of gravel, and when I stepped outside, my heart sank. There, parked by the creek, was a bulldozer, and standing next to it were 2 men in hard hats, clipboards in hand. Before I could even get down the steps, the engine revved, and that machine rolled forward. Its massive steel blade slammed against the side of my bridge with a crack that echoed across the water. Wood splintered, nails screeched free, and in seconds, my $10,000 bridge was nothing but broken boards sinking into the creek. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. By the time I reached them, it was over. My bridge, my pride, my dream, was destroyed. And the men? They handed me a copy of a removal order, signed by the HOA president. They didn't even look sorry. They climbed back into their truck, drove off, and left me standing there, staring at the wreckage. I wish I could tell you I handled it calmly, but in that moment, my blood boiled. Rage burned in my chest like I'd never felt before. $10,000 of my money, months of planning and building, memories tied to every plank, gone, just like that. I walked back into my house, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at the letter they'd left behind. That's when it hit me. They thought they'd won. They thought, by breaking me down, by destroying something I loved, I'd roll over and take it. But they had no idea who they were dealing with, because I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to end this war once and for all, and little did they know. I was about to discover the one thing they relied on the most, something far bigger than my bridge, something worth $13 million, and soon enough, it would belong to me. After the dust settled that morning, I stood there, staring at the empty space where my bridge used to be. The creek flowed quietly, almost mocking me with its calm. My hands shook, not just from anger, but from the feeling of complete violation. I walked back into the house, sat down at my desk, and pulled out every document I had on that bridge, the permits, the approvals, the receipts. I wanted proof, evidence, ammunition. Because I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. I called the HOA office first. Of course, no one answered. Just a chirpy voicemail telling me to leave a message and they'll get back to me. I left one, and it wasn't polite. Then I called the HOA president directly. Her name was Marlene, a woman in her 50s with that kind of sharp, fake smile that never reached her eyes. She picked up on the second ring, and the moment I heard her voice, the rage came flooding back. "Why did you do it?" I asked. Her tone was syrupy sweet. "Oh, Mr. Carter, we had no choice. The board voted unanimously. The bridge violated community guidelines. It had to go." "You destroyed $10,000 of my property. You had no legal right." Now, she interrupted. "You signed the HOA agreement when you bought your house. You gave us the authority. You should have known better." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. She was enjoying this. I could hear it in her voice. To her, this wasn't about a bridge. This was about power. I hung up on her. For the rest of that day, I couldn't focus. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there running through scenarios in my head, taking them to court, rallying the neighbors, filing police reports. Every option felt too small, too slow, too weak. Then, that night, as I sat flipping through the HOA handbook, something caught my eye. The financial section. Most people never read that part. It's buried in the back, filled with boring numbers and balance sheets. But I did. And as I scanned the pages, I started to notice things didn't add up. The HOA had debts, big debts. They were behind on maintenance contracts, had liens filed against them, and were funneling a shocking amount of money into consulting fees. I dug deeper. I started looking up public records, property reports, water rights, and that's when I found it. The HOA didn't own the water supply for the community. They leased it from a private company. And that company, it was in trouble. I almost laughed when I saw it. The entire neighborhood, every sink, every shower, every lawn sprinkler, depended on a single water provider. A provider that was drowning in debt, desperate for a buyer. The asking price? $13 million. Now, don't get me wrong. $13 million is a lot of money, more than I could just pull out of a hat. But I wasn't exactly broke either. I'd built a business years ago, sold it, and while I wasn't trying to live like a king, I had investments, assets, connections. If I really wanted to, I could make this happen. And the more I thought about it, the more it burned in my chest. They took $10,000 from me. $10,000, that meant something. So why not take $13 million from them? Why not go for the jugular? For days, I did my homework. I called banks, spoke to lawyers, consulted with a friend in private equity. Everyone said the same thing. It was risky, but possible. With financing, with leverage, with the right structure, I could buy it. But I couldn't let the HOA know. Not yet. So I set up an LLC, neutral name, nothing that could be traced back to me. I put together a team, people who owed me favors, people who liked the idea of sticking it to a corrupt HOA. And quietly, behind the scenes, we started negotiations. Meanwhile, the HOA kept pushing. They sent me another letter, this one fining me for debris in the creek. The debris, of course, was the remains of the bridge they destroyed. I almost framed that letter out of pure spite. At the next community meeting, I sat in the back, listening as Marlene and her little board bragged about how they took decisive action to protect the neighborhood's image. Some people applauded, others looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Fear has a funny way of keeping people silent. I kept my mouth shut too, because the truth was, every smug word out of Marlene's mouth only fueled me more. They thought they'd beaten me. They thought I was just another homeowner they could push around. But they didn't know that in just a few weeks I'd be holding the very thing their whole empire depended on. And when I finally revealed it, well, let's just say no one in that room would ever forget it. The weeks that followed were some of the busiest of my life. By day, I went about my routine like nothing had happened, mowing the lawn, waving politely at neighbors, showing up at the community meetings with a straight face. But behind the scenes, I was orchestrating something much bigger. The negotiations for the water company weren't simple. $13 million doesn't just slide across the table overnight. I had to prove I could manage the debt, put together financing, and most importantly, convince the current owners I was serious. But here's the funny thing about businesses that are failing. They don't need much convincing. They're desperate. They want out. And when you walk in with a plan, with the ability to take the burden off their shoulders, they're more than happy to hand over the keys. The owner of the water company was a man named Harold, gray hair, tired eyes, the kind of guy who looked like the stress had aged him 20 years. When I first sat down with him, he leaned across the table, lowered his voice, and said, "You have no idea how much I want out of this mess." Oh, but I did. We went back and forth for days. Lawyers drafted contracts. My LLC made offers, counter-offers. At one point, another buyer almost swooped in, but they wanted too many concessions. I kept it simple. I'd take the debt, the infrastructure, the rights, all of it. And finally, after weeks of silence, I got the call. "Congratulations," Harold said. "It's yours." I sat there in my office, staring at the paperwork in my hands. Just like that, I owned the water supply for the entire neighborhood. Every drop that flowed through those pipes, mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd taken away my bridge, a piece of wood and nails worth $10,000. But now, I held $13 million of leverage over them. Of course, I didn't announce it right away. No, that would have ruined the fun. Instead, I started small. The first change was maintenance adjustments. A slight uptick in fees, just enough for the HOA to notice, but not enough to suspect anything unusual. They grumbled, but they paid. Next came the water restrictions. A letter went out to every household, informing them of mandatory conservation measures. No watering lawns on certain days, limited pool refills. Again, nothing too extreme, just enough to make life a little less comfortable. The HOA panicked. They held emergency meetings, scribbling notes, whispering behind closed doors. But what could they do? They didn't own the water. They had no leverage. I watched it all quietly from my porch. Every time I saw Marlene strut down the street, barking orders at someone about their trash cans or fence color, I smiled, because I knew the day was coming when she wouldn't be strutting anymore. One evening, I got a knock at my door. It was my neighbor Dave. Good guy. He leaned in, looking around like he was afraid someone might be listening. "You hear about the water hikes?" he asked. I played dumb. "Yeah, crazy stuff." He lowered his voice. "The HOA's losing it. They don't know what to do." Apparently, the water company's under new ownership. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Wonder who bought it. Dave shrugged. Whoever it is, they've got the HOA by the throat. If only he knew. But here's where things got really interesting. Because the HOA, in their arrogance, thought they could fight back. They sent out a letter to every homeowner, claiming they were in negotiations with the water company and that they would resolve the issue quickly. They had no idea the man they were negotiating against was the same man sitting quietly in the back row of their meetings, arms folded, a small smile on his face. And every day that passed, every dollar they lost, brought me closer to the moment. I'd been waiting for the reveal, because I wasn't just going to control their water. I was going to make them beg for it. The funny thing about power is, most people don't notice it until it's gone. At first, the homeowners didn't realize how dependent they were. A small fee hike here, a slight inconvenience there. It was just noise in the background. But as the weeks rolled on, those little changes became harder to ignore. Lawns started turning brown. Pool parties were cut short. People began whispering about running out of water pressure in the mornings, and the HOA, they were losing control. Marlene called an urgent town hall. The community center was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, arms crossed, faces tense. I sat quietly in the back row, keeping my expression neutral, but inside, I was savoring every second. Marlene stood at the podium, papers clutched in her hands, her usual confidence cracked just a little. "We're aware of the issues," she said, her voice shaky but trying to sound firm. "The new water company has implemented restrictions that are unreasonable. But rest assured, your board is taking action. We are negotiating as we speak." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People weren't buying it. A man in the front, Rao, stood up. "Negotiating? My family went 2 days last week with barely enough water to shower. What are you doing about that?" Another woman jumped in. "My bill's gone up $50 in a month. 50! And for what? We're getting less water." Marlene held up her hands, flustered. "We understand your frustration, but this is temporary." "Temporary?" Someone shouted from the back. "It's been weeks!" I leaned back in my chair, smiling faintly as the chaos grew. The board tried to calm everyone down, but the anger was boiling over, and for the first time I saw it. The shift. People weren't afraid of the HOA anymore. They were turning against them. That night, as the crowd spilled out of the community center, I overheard conversations. Neighbors whispering about getting rid of the board, about finding out who owned the water company and dealing with them directly. I knew it wouldn't be long before the truth came out. But that was fine with me, because when it did, it would hit harder than anything they could imagine. In the meantime, I kept tightening the screws. The next month, another letter went out. Due to infrastructure upgrades, it read, additional service fees will be applied. Translation, bills went up again. Not by a lot, just enough to sting. And that's when the real cracks began to show. The HOA had built their little empire on control. They dictated every detail of people's lives, from fence height to holiday decorations. But suddenly, their rules didn't matter. People stopped caring about lawn inspections when their sprinklers barely worked. They stopped attending HOA meetings when they knew the board was powerless. Marlene, of course, doubled down. She started handing out fines like candy, trash cans left out, paint that was too faded, even complaints about unsanctioned porch furniture. But instead of scaring people, it backfired. Homeowners laughed in her face. Some even tore up the letters right in front of her. The board was collapsing from the inside. And I was patient. Because revenge, I'd learned, isn't always about the knockout punch. Sometimes it's about watching your enemies squirm piece by piece as they realize they're not in control anymore. One evening, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I noticed Marlene walking past my house. Her usual brisk pace was gone. Instead, Her shoulders sagged, her eyes darting nervously. She looked small. She glanced at me, probably expecting me to gloat. But I didn't say a word. I just lifted my mug and gave her a polite nod, because the truth was, she already knew. She might not have had the proof yet, but in her gut, she could feel it. Someone was pulling the strings. Someone had outplayed her, and soon enough she was going to find out exactly who. It didn't take long for the HOA to do what desperate people always do: lawyer up. About 2 weeks after the latest round of water restrictions, I got a letter in the mail. Thick envelope, heavy paper, all dressed up with legal jargon. It was from the HOA's attorney, claiming that the new water policies were unfair, discriminatory, and in violation of community agreements. I laughed when I read it, out loud. Sitting at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, I couldn't help but chuckle. Because here's the thing. They were threatening to sue a company they didn't even know I owned. The next day, I had my attorney draft a polite, professional response. Nothing aggressive, just a reminder that the water company was operating within its legal rights, that the infrastructure fees were standard practice, and that conservation measures were necessary due to regional supply issues. In other words, sit down and shut up. I sent it off, and within a week, the HOA held another emergency meeting. This time, fewer people showed up. The community was losing faith in them fast. I sat quietly in the back again, listening as Marlene tried to rally the room. "The water company is exploiting us," she shouted, her face red. "They're raising fees illegally. We have rights, and we're going to fight this." A man stood up from the side. "Fight with what money, Marlene? You've drained the HOA fund paying lawyers already. Our dues are gone. And for what? To fight a company you clearly have no control over?" The room erupted in murmurs. People were angry, but not at the water company, at her, at the board. Marlene's face went pale. She stammered, tried to regain control, but it was no use. The tide had turned. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, letting it all play out, because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I made another move. A quiet one, but powerful. I instructed my company to send the HOA an official notice. Due to delinquent payments, their community account was now in arrears. Late fees applied. Future services might be suspended if they didn't settle their balance. You should have seen the panic. Neighbors got notices taped to their doors, warning them that the HOA had failed to keep up with bills. It didn't take long for word to spread. Suddenly, homeowners weren't just annoyed, they were furious. Had stripped the HOA of their last weapon, credibility. And here's where the twist came. Because the board, in their arrogance, decided to escalate one final time. They called me in for a compliance review. Oh, it was rich. I got a letter saying I needed to appear before the board to discuss ongoing violations. Imagine that the same people who destroyed my bridge, the same people drowning in debt, still thought they could summon me like a school principal calling in a misbehaving kid. I showed up, of course. Walked into that little conference room calm as could be. Marlene sat at the head of the table, flanked by her board members, trying to look intimidating. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice sharp, "you've been openly hostile to this community. You've ignored guidelines. You've undermined the board's authority." I didn't say a word. I just let her rant, let her build up steam. Finally, she leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "If you don't comply, we'll have no choice but to pursue further legal action." That's when I smiled. Slowly, calmly, and I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the water company's ownership documents. My name, my LLC, everything laid out in black and white. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Sue me, but you might want to think twice before you bite the hand that fills your taps." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Marlene's face drained of color. One of the board members actually choked on his water. And me? I just sat back, enjoying the moment. Because this was it, the reveal, the checkmate, the moment they realized they hadn't just lost control of me. They'd lost control of everything. I walked into the HOA meeting hall with my bridge model under my arm, the same one they had mocked. I could hear the whispers as soon as I stepped through the door. "That's him," someone hissed. "The guy with the lawsuit." The HOA president cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he said, forcing a smile, "what brings you here tonight?" I placed the model bridge on the table in front of him. "This. You all destroyed the real version of this. You cost me $10,000. You trampled on my rights as a homeowner, and now you want to act like it's no big deal?" He scoffed. "Mr. Carter, the HOA board made a unanimous decision. The bridge was non-compliant. It had to go." I leaned in closer, my voice low but firm. "You made a mistake, and now you're going to pay for it." The room went silent. Every eye in the hall was on me. The treasurer, a wiry man with glasses, tried to smooth things over. "Let's be reasonable. Surely we can come to some agreement. What is it you want exactly?" I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I straightened up and said, "I want my bridge back, or I want $10,000. Immediately." The president laughed. Actually laughed in my face. "You'll get nothing. We had the authority, and we exercised it. That's the end of it." That laugh was the last straw. I looked around at the neighbors, some shifting uncomfortably, some smirking along with the president, others avoiding my gaze. And I thought to myself, if they want a fight, I'll give them one they'll never forget. As I turned to leave, I paused at the door. "Enjoy your water supply while you still can," I said, my voice carrying through the hall. "Because soon enough, it won't belong to you anymore." The president frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just walked out, the sound of their murmurs following me. What they didn't know was that I had already started making calls. I knew about the HOA's biggest weakness. They relied on a privately owned water system that supplied the entire neighborhood, a system that, with the right connections and the right amount of money, could be bought, and I had both. The night after the HOA meeting, I sat at my desk with a single lamp glowing, papers spread everywhere. My laptop screen showed the water company's ownership records. I traced the lines, the contracts, the names. That's when I found it, a shell company holding majority shares in the neighborhood's water system. Not the county, not the state, private investors, which meant it was up for grabs. I picked up the phone and called an old friend, Mark. He worked in real estate acquisitions, the kind of guy who knew who owned what and how much it would take to buy them out. "Mark, I need you to look into something." "For me," I said, "it's about a local water utility. Small, private, but it supplies an entire subdivision. I want to know who I need to talk to." He whistled. "Going for the throat, huh? What did they do this time?" "They destroyed my bridge," I replied simply. "But this isn't just about the bridge anymore. It's about teaching them a lesson." By the next morning, Mark had a name for me: Dalton Properties, LLC. They were bleeding money and quietly entertaining offers. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. I met with one of their representatives at a downtown cafe. He was a sharp-suited man with a tired look in his eyes, the kind of guy who'd been fighting fires for too long. "Mr. Carter," he said, shaking my hand, "I understand you're interested in the Greenbrook water utility." "I am," I replied, "and I'm ready to move fast. What's the asking price?" He leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. $13 million. That's for the whole system, pipes, pumps, reservoirs, everything. It's a big buy, but it could be very lucrative. $13 million. More than the cost of my house, more than I'd ever planned to spend. But in that moment, I didn't flinch, because I knew what it would mean. I smiled slowly. "Send me the paperwork." For the first time in weeks, I felt a fire in my chest. This wasn't revenge out of anger anymore. This was strategy. They had laughed when they tore down my bridge. Let's see if they'd still be laughing when I owned the very water that ran through their homes. That night, I signed the first round of documents. The war had officially begun. I kept the deal under wraps. Not a word to my neighbors, not even to the few who had quietly sympathized with me. If there was one thing I had learned about HOAs, it was that rumors spread faster than wildfire. The last thing I needed was for them to catch wind of what I was planning before the ink was dry. Every day, I played the part of the quiet, beaten-down homeowner. I mowed my lawn, waved politely at passers-by, even attended another HOA barbecue. The president smirked at me the whole time, as if daring me to challenge his authority again. What he didn't know was that behind closed doors, the paperwork was moving at lightning speed. My lawyer drafted the contracts, Mark handled the negotiations, and Dalton Properties practically begged me to take the water system off their hands. They were drowning in debt, and my cash offer was their lifeboat. But while I was making moves in silence, whispers started to spread anyway. One evening, as I was bringing in my trash bins, my neighbor Sarah approached me. She leaned in, her voice low. "Hey, is it true? Are you buying the water company?" I froze for a split second, then forced a laugh. "Water company? Where'd you hear that?" She shrugged. "People talk. The HOA board's been in a frenzy. They think you're plotting something big. They said you threatened them at the meeting." I smirked. Sounds like paranoia to me. But inside, I knew the clock was ticking. The board was getting suspicious. I needed to close the deal before they had time to rally against me. The following week, I drove out to the utilities pumping station, a cluster of low buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. As I stood there, watching the water surge through pipes that fed every single faucet, sprinkler, and shower in the subdivision, I felt a surge of power. Soon, this would all be mine. I could picture it already, the HOA president's smug grin, vanishing the moment he realized I owned the one thing they couldn't live without. They had taken my bridge. I was about to take their lifeline. The first real sign that the HOA was rattled came on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting on my porch, sipping a cup of coffee, when 3 board members marched up my driveway like they were on a mission. At the front was the president, flanked by the treasurer and the secretary. "Mr. Carter," the president said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I set my cup down slowly. "About what?" He crossed his arms. "We've heard disturbing rumors that you're trying to interfere with the Greenbrook water utility. Let me be clear. You have no authority to negotiate with them. That's HOA business." I almost laughed in his face. "HOA business?" They thought they controlled everything, even something they didn't own. I leaned back in my chair. "Rumors are funny things. People will believe anything if you say it loud enough." The treasurer adjusted his glasses nervously. "Look, if you are trying something here, you should stop. The HOA will fight back. We have legal resources you can't imagine." I raised an eyebrow. "Legal resources, like the ones you used to demolish my bridge without permission? Or the ones you used to fine Mrs. Patterson for planting tulips instead of roses?" The secretary shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, I thought she might crack, but the president quickly cut her off. "Enough," he snapped. "We're warning you, Carter. Drop whatever game you're playing. You don't want to make enemies with the HOA." I stood up slowly, meeting his gaze. "Funny thing about enemies," I said. "Sometimes the best way to deal with them is to cut off their supply." The president frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I just smiled. "You'll find out soon enough." They left my driveway fuming, whispering among themselves, but I knew it wouldn't end there. The rumors were spreading faster now. Some neighbors avoided me completely. Others watched me curiously as if waiting for me to make my next move. That night, my lawyer called. "The contracts are ready. Once you wire the funds, the water system is yours." I stared out my window at the neat rows of homes, their porch lights glowing like stars in the dark. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning the deal closed, I woke up earlier than usual. There was a strange thrill in the air, like the calm right before a storm. I poured myself a coffee, glanced out the window at the neighborhood, and smiled. Today was the day everything would change. By mid-morning, my lawyer confirmed the transfer. The Greenbrook water utility was officially under my ownership. Every pipe, every pump, every reservoir feeding the neighborhood now answered to me. I didn't make a big announcement. Not yet. Instead, I let the HOA stew in ignorance for a few hours, giving them the illusion that everything was normal. Then came the first notices. The HOA president opened his email and froze. His face paled as he scanned the message. What is this?" he muttered, shaking. The treasurer leaned over his shoulder. It's from the water company. Our account, overdue. Fees applied. Services might be suspended if we don't pay." The president's hands trembled. This can't be. We've been negotiating with them for weeks. Who owns the utility now?" I walked into the HOA office moments later, calm and collected as if I had nothing to do with it. "Good morning," I said, my voice casual. "I hear there are some issues with the water supply." Marlene, the president, spun around, eyes wide. "Carter, what's going on?" I leaned against the desk, smiling faintly. "Funny you should ask. I just wanted to make sure everyone here had adequate notice that the Greenbrook water utility is now under new ownership." Her mouth opened, then closed. "What do you mean, new ownership?" I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the official documents, contracts, signatures, everything. I laid them on the desk one by one. "This," I said, tapping the top sheet, "is why your board can no longer bully homeowners, tear down private property, or ignore their own responsibilities. Because as of today, I own the water supply for the entire neighborhood." Silence. Absolute silence. The room went cold. Marlene's face went from shock to panic in seconds. The treasurer and secretary exchanged frantic glances, realizing the full scope of what had just happened. I don't understand," she stammered. This can't." "It's real," I said simply. "And if the HOA wants to continue operating, they'll do it on my terms." Suddenly, everything clicked for them. The fines, the fees, the power struggles. They had underestimated me. They had destroyed something small, thinking it would break me. But now, I held the real leverage. And as I watched them scramble, trying to process the news, I couldn't help but think of that old bridge, the one they had destroyed. They took $10,000 from me. I gave them $13 million worth of consequences in return. And the best part? They had no one to blame but themselves. By the afternoon, word had spread like wildfire. Neighbors were calling each other, sharing screenshots of the official documents. The HOA office was chaos, phones ringing non-stop, board members running around like headless chickens. Marlene tried to rally them. "We need to negotiate. We need to fight back." But the treasurer shook his head. "Fight back? Carter owns the utility. Every penny, every drop of water, it's all his. We have no leverage. We're exposed." Outside, the neighborhood was buzzing too. Some people cheered quietly at the thought of justice being served. Others were anxious. After all, water was essential, and the rules had changed overnight. I made my first official move as the new owner the following morning. A polite notice to the HOA explaining that all water service would continue uninterrupted, but that fees would be adjusted to reflect proper maintenance and infrastructure costs. Nothing extreme, just enough to demonstrate control. The HOA president stormed over, waving the notice. "You can't do this! This is extortion!" I smiled. "It's not extortion, it's business, and it's fair. You see, the community thrives on water. Now that it's my responsibility, I make sure it's done right. And if you want to continue as a functioning board, you'll have to cooperate." Marlene's face twisted in frustration. You You can't do this to us. We're the HOA. Funny, I said. You seem to enjoy enforcing your rules on everyone else. Guess what? The tables have turned. Meanwhile, some neighbors approached me directly, curious but supportive. Carter, one man said, we heard what happened. We're impressed. You've shown them they can't push people around. I nodded. It's not just about me. It's about accountability. Everyone should follow the rules, but no one should be abused by those in power. By the end of the week, the HOA was in full-blown panic mode. Meetings were being canceled. Board members resigned. Marlene disappeared for a couple of days. No one knew where she went. The neighborhood, once dominated by petty fines and arbitrary rules, was breathing easier. And me? I sat back, enjoying the quiet after the storm. My bridge still wasn't rebuilt, but the principle had been served. They had underestimated me, and now they had no choice but to acknowledge it. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. The HOA had learned the hard way. Never underestimate someone who has been wronged. And sometimes, the best revenge is the one that leaves your enemies powerless while leaving you in full control. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood slowly returned to a new rhythm. Water flowed reliably, lawns were green again, and residents began to relax, knowing their supply was secure, but under new management. The HOA, once a symbol of control and intimidation, had been humbled. Board members either resigned or kept quiet, afraid to overstep. Marlene didn't attend another meeting, her presence replaced by whispers and wary glances. I walked through the community one evening, nodding politely to neighbors who waved. Some still shot me curious looks, others smiled, understanding the quiet power shift that had taken place. My bridge was still gone, a small reminder of the spark that had started all this. But in its place was something far bigger: accountability, respect, and a lesson well learned for those who tried to dominate others. I met with a few HOA members privately, making it clear that cooperation and transparency were the only way forward. Surprisingly, some thanked me, grudgingly at first, then genuinely, for restoring balance and fairness. It was ironic in a way. They had thought they could bully one homeowner, and in doing so, they had created a situation where they were entirely at my mercy, and I hadn't sought to destroy them completely. I had simply reminded them who truly held the power. As I stood on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the rooftops, I reflected on everything that had happened. Sometimes, justice doesn't come through anger or lawsuits alone. Sometimes, it comes quietly, strategically, and undeniably, and when it does, it leaves everyone involved, both the oppressed and the oppressors, forever changed. I poured another cup of coffee and smiled to myself. The bridge may have been gone, but the victory, that was built to last. Because in the end, power is only real when it's respected. And they had finally learned that lesson, and with that, I could finally rest, knowing that the HOA and anyone else tempted to push people around would think twice before underestimating me again. And that's today's wild HOA story. What do you think? Was the HOA in the right, or did they take it way too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next unbelievable HOA tale. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.